have two of your fellow candidates on last week. This is usually every other week, but we're doing this weekly talk show so everybody could hear from you. And our collective agreement as a group is come open-minded, leave informed. We're building a trust-based community where people can ask real questions about people, planet, and democracy. And we do this with respect. So everyone should feel valued and safe and welcome to ask questions. Please be engaged in the conversation and communicate directly and with care. Some Zoom etiquette, stay on mute, ask questions freely in the chat, but I've captured those that you asked in advance for the most part. I'll facilitate the beginning of the convo, and in the end, there'll be time for questions. So Katie, without further ado, was
I can't find my poll.
Whoever can't find their poll, they can maybe put themselves on mute. Okay, great. Katie was born in Iowa, same year as me. Went to Yale and Harvard, law degree, was a law professor, a staff attorney for the Attorney General, and on the faculty of UC Irvine before she became a Congresswoman in 2019. Including in her district are a lot of beaches. I'm very jealous. Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, among other. Katie, I picked a quote from many that I thought was best describing you. As a single mom to 3 school-age kids, I'm invested in our state's future, and we need more leaders in Washington who know what it's like to live, work, and raise a family in California today. I could not agree more, and I think I'll go through all these questions that folks asked, but maybe to segue over to you, Megan Clark wrote, what are the top 5 things you feel like you've accomplished since you've been in office in 2019? And what are the top 3 priorities you have in the Senate? And if you want to elaborate on why do you even want to be in the Senate? Are you on mute maybe? Or am I just...
Thank you. Let me read through those 5 accomplishments for you. And one of the things I think you'll hear is that they're not all legislation. So some of them are legislation, but some of them are about getting Congress to actually do its job better. And so the first one I'll mention is the fact that I've never taken corporate PAC money. Right. And yet was the highest fundraiser in the Democratic caucus. So that really illustrated for people that you can run your campaign. I'm sorry, someone's talking and it's not my kids for a change.
Yeah, I think I've mastered the God control on mute, so you're good.
Okay. All right, so that you can run a campaign living kind of our values of campaign finance reform, and you can have all of the resources you need. So Democrats talk about ending Citizens United. That requires a new Supreme Court. That requires a constitutional amendment. But in the meantime, we can change how we run. And so I really exploded this idea that you have to take corporate money in order to run a competitive campaign. And I had the most expensive House race in the country last election. Lexi mentioned I represent a lot of beaches and she's jealous. She would not be if she knew how many Republicans live in those beaches and how difficult it can be to kind of break through kind of a really calcified political environment in some of those cities. So that's one accomplishment. Second accomplishment. Really proud of my bill to crack down on the polluters who make big messes and don't clean them up, and who were paying a rental and royalty rate on our public lands that had been unchanged for 100 years. And this really illustrates what I believe is Congress's kind of informal slogan, which is solving yesterday's problems tomorrow, maybe. Right? So that we let things go for so long. And so updating that is really about making sure that we're getting our fair share as taxpayers when we allow drilling on public land, but we're also leveling the playing field for clean energy and other forms of energy on public lands. 3, I'm incredibly proud of my work on mental health. I had 2 bills signed into law, but I want to mention one that did not get signed into law, but it was a huge accomplishment to get it past the House because it was bipartisan and it was on one of the most controversial and difficult topics to bring people together on from both sides of the aisle. It's called the Mental Health Justice Act. And it is based on real programs that are working in local communities to send dedicated mental health responders in lieu of law enforcement when someone calls 911 in mental health crisis. So we wouldn't want a firefighter to show up. We wouldn't want a police car at a facility to show up at our fire. We'd want a firefighter. It's the same idea. Someone's in mental health crisis, we should have. And we got police support for that, including the Orange County Sheriff, who, needless to say, is a Republican. Fourth thing, let me check these off because otherwise I'm going to forget what I want to tell you. Okay, fourth thing, really, really proud to have gotten free COVID tests for every American. And I did that not by passing a law, but by holding government bureaucrats to account. So if you think back to those early days of COVID, there were no tests. And if you went to the emergency room, the bill for a test would be over $1,000 because they have to screen you for flu and other things. So I went through that and I pushed Trump's Center for Disease Control director to use the law that we had written decades ago that said in a public health emergency, you can make testing free. And so I was the 44th member of Congress, the very last one to question him. And what I was able to get was something that really transformed the landscape for people during that early time in COVID. It was free testing regardless of insurance, regardless of immigration status. It was a really powerful tool and really showed people in that moment that yes, government can be doing something. It's not just stay home and hope for the best, but actually here's a tool to help keep your family safer. The last one I'll mention is going to sound much less exciting, but I think really reflects that institutional kind of work in Congress that I'm really proud of, which is I was the first person, this is unbelievable, but I was the first person to say to Congress, why are there no translation services available for me to communicate with my constituents? And we live in an incredibly diverse state. And so I was able, after pushing, we have finally now have translation services. So if I want to help a constituent who has a challenge, if I want to communicate about a public health issue or legislation, I can now use translation services to do that. The prior answer was, can you find a staffer who might know some of the language? And so that's really about professionalizing and recognizing that one of our most important functions is to communicate with people. So I'll say those 5 things for my accomplishments. Was there a part 2? 3 things I want to accomplish, correct?
Yeah, that 3 things you want to accomplish as senator, but let me just say, Katie, I didn't know that about the translation services. And I think that's just one example of inclusive leadership. If we don't have representation that actually realizes, oh, people can't understand, 23% of Spanish speakers in California wouldn't be able to understand what you're saying if we don't have them in Spanish, let alone people who are hearing impaired. So that was really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, the second part was 3 priorities you have in the Senate. And I guess why do you have to be in the Senate when lots of people have pushed back to say, God, you're doing such a good job in Congress. We need you to hold the blue seat in Congress. And you give up your Congress seat, right? If you don't win Senate.
Correct. Let me start at the back here with why I want to be in the Senate and how this works. So normally the way I would explain this is your name can only be on the ballot for once, but actually my name is on the ballot twice because Senator Feinstein passed away and we have both a special election and a regular one. So think about it this way. You can only run for one office at a time. We wouldn't want to have at the end of an election somebody who was both our governor and our Secretary of State, for example. Same thing. So I've chosen to run for the Senate. That means I will not be in the House of Representatives next Congress. And part of the reason I chose to do that is the Senate as an institution is much more in need of kind of a reboot and a refresh, and it really is sort of ossified. And part of that is the 6-year terms. Part of that is that it's seen as something that you do after you have done other public service. The House is pretty fresh. I was part of the class of 2018 that had, and most of us had not been in office when we ran. It was in the wake of Donald Trump's election, and there was a lot of new energy coming into the House at that time. It's not to suggest that there aren't things that we need to fix in the House of Representatives, but in my time in the House of Representatives, good bill after good bill, from my Mental Health Justice Act to the Dream and Promise Act that would have given Dreamers citizenship, which is a promise we made to them, the Equality Act, which would have prevented LGBTQ discrimination, they all died in the Senate. So it is really clear to me that we need some fresh vision and fresh energy, and that the status quo structurally in the Senate isn't working. And I think that's where I've been a little different than my colleagues, is being able and willing to kind of say what structurally is holding us back, and to look at sort of across policies and see those problems. So yes, it's the filibuster, but it's a bunch of other things too. And so we'll hopefully have a chance to talk about some of those. My top 3 priorities, I'll keep these quick. Housing, affordability, climate change, climate resilience, green energy, and then corruption. And corruption, I really should bracket with trust in government. And so on housing, look, this has been the biggest challenge for California for my entire adult life. And it's just getting worse. And I hear it from business owners, from people who are trying to recruit to California. I hear it from students when I taught at UC Irvine, who are saying, thanks for the UC education. Now I'm moving out somewhere I can afford after we've been subsidizing their education. I hear it from my own kids who are 12, 15, and 18, and who say to me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to live in California. And so I released a housing plan. It's really been a big issue. But Washington doesn't talk about housing. It's just starting to. And when it does, it's really centered around homelessness. Make no mistake, huge problem. What causes homelessness? Housing that's not affordable. Now, when we think about homelessness, we think about people on the street. That can have other causes, but normally that process begins with an eviction. It begins because somebody couldn't afford a home. And so we cannot just throw money at solving homelessness on the back end. We have to start preventing homelessness on the front end, including overcrowding, 3 and 4 families living in 2-bedroom apartments, people living in their car, people having to move every month, or living in motels or insecure shelter like that. Climate, I don't think I need to tell you guys about this. We all want to survive. This one is a no-brainer, but it hasn't always been in Washington because there are very, very powerful lobbyists and structural barriers, including a big oil. And so this is really important. I think one of the things I would say is really helping people to understand not just the cost of moving to clean energy, the cost of moving away from fossil fuels. We measure that. What we don't measure is the cost of not doing it, which is tremendous. We are already spending $150 billion a year in climate-related disasters, weather disasters. So we have to really think about, like, there's a cost to Washington's decades of inaction here. And climate really illustrates that, solving yesterday's problems tomorrow. We should have been doing some of these changes 20 and 30 years ago in a way that's more gradual. Each day we wait on climate, our choices get fewer and they get more expensive. Our options get more expensive. And so that's really important. I'll have a chance, I think, to talk more about corruption and sort of trust in government in a minute. But that is really a huge part of why I've been successful in energizing younger voters. And by younger here, and I'm going to talk more about younger voters, I want to define what I mean by that. For today's Democratic Party, a younger voter is anyone not on Medicare. That is, it's anyone under 65. A real young voter is somebody under 50. This is a huge, huge problem in how Democrats engage with the public and how we're going to build a majority. So it's not just, when I say younger, people sometimes think I'm talking about college students, for example, and I am talking about them, but I'm also talking about the erosion of trust in government among people who are 30 and 40. And that is really, really important that we change how we do Washington, that we shake up the Senate, and that will help us rebuild that trust in government. So I'm sure I'll have more of a chance to talk about that, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, Katie, I just put out your climate plan and your housing plan. I do, if we have time now or offline, I want to talk to you more about climate and getting some consistency on how we update the federal accounting standards to include carbon as a cost of goods sold, which my friend has talked a lot about. But what I want to go back to is something that I really found curious when I ran, and I'm really helping draw the analogy. I know it's not perfect, but the analogy for a lot of people on this call who come from business or nonprofits to running for Senate or any elected officials. And I explained that there's 4 channels to raise money. You're doing a great job at the tech equivalent of product-led, grassroots. You know, people know your name, you have a brand awareness, and you've really opened up that channel, not unlike Obama, who kind of defined that avenue. Then you have call time, and I was supposed to spend 70% of my time making at least 100 calls a day to individuals, which one does a lot. I don't know if yours is 70% of time, but that was mine. And then there's this outside sales, you know, people who will stump for you and really get certain number of people to give you dollars. That happens through events. What I found interesting is PACs, not super PACs, but actual corporate PACs are not that big of a deal. They didn't feel like a big deal. And let me just hold up the contribution limits to make my point here, because I feel like I just had it. Here we go. So if you see here, an individual, I can give you $3,300. A PAC can give you $5,000. Like, tell me why, because I sort of said, hey, if people want to give me money, I'm not really in the business of turning them down. I'm not going to do anything in exchange for their money. Where I really thought the evil was super PACs, where you get unlimited money from businesses or individuals who spend money on your behalf, mostly on advertising. So do you see that distinction as well, or what am I missing about why corporate PACs are so evil?
Yeah, so great and very helpful breakdown, because I think there's a lot of confusion about how campaigns are really funded. The biggest problem with corporate PACs is probably, if I'm really being honest, and I always am, for better or worse, is probably the perception, right? Which is that Americans perceive that, and in some areas this is definitely true, that corporations have growing political power. And some of that is because a lot of that super PAC that we're going to get to in a minute is also funded by corporations, right? And so I think part of it is it's a perception issue. It's that you shouldn't be at a reception drinking bad Chardonnay and eating cheese cubes and taking lobbyist checks and collecting a check from a health insurance company or a pharmaceutical company, and then an hour later voting on whether we should regulate them. Right? The public, even if we all can keep that separate, and I think people do sometimes, the public doesn't buy it. So that's one of the reasons that corporate PACs are a problem. Let me say something else. When you look at your 4 categories of fundraising, grassroots, call time, PACs, what was the other one? Oh, events.
Yeah.
So the problem is a lot of candidates can't do grassroots because the product they're selling has no appeal.
Yeah,
right?
or they just haven't been in politics before. Yeah.
Right. It's actually the opposite. They've been in politics a long time, and grassroots fundraising happened, and it left. They didn't get engaged and get a hold of it. So part of the reason that corporate PAC money is so prevalent is because it does not require the candidate to do the really hard work of standing on their own 2 feet and answering tough questions from the public, from donors at events. When you send out emails, people write you back, they have questions. It's like, how do you get that corporate PAC check? You show up for the cheese cubes.
Yeah.
And that feels, and it is perceived to be much easier. When you do an event, people ask you questions like, I don't agree with your policy. Why did you take this vote? You have to travel. So I think a lot of the corporate PAC money is about people kind of avoiding and evading this part of the job that is about earning people's support. Because at its best, that's what fundraising is about. With regard to super PACs, we should talk about this with specificity in this race, because super PAC spending is really reshaping the landscape of this Senate race. There is a super PAC that is spending $3.5 million each week. And to put that in perspective, I'm the second highest fundraiser in this race by a lot. And I've raised $14 million, 15 million. So for someone to come in February and start spending $3.5 million each week for 4 weeks is really reshaping the race.
Yeah.
And so that is really part of the challenge with super PACs, is the amount of influence that they're able to mount drowns out the messages of the candidates who are trying to communicate with voters.
Yeah, and that's Adam Schiff is spending his, we think it's $3.5 million a week.
So it's 2 super PACs that are really strong. One is supporting Adam Schiff. It's sort of that's its goal. And what they're using their money for is not to run ads about Adam Schiff, but to run ads about Steve Garvey, who's one of the Republicans in this race. So the ad says, and they don't have to, super PACs also don't have to have what's called stand by your ad. So have you ever heard people say, I'm Katie Porter and I approve this message? Super PACs are unaffiliated with a campaign. And so what they're doing is they're working to elect Adam Schiff by boosting Steve Garvey's name recognition. So all of those ads you've seen that mention Steve Garvey, I want to be really clear about this. Steve and Lexi, I think you'll be able to help people as a candidate to understand what I'm saying here. Steve Garvey's total cash at the end of the year was $300,000.
Yeah.
You can't buy zero TV in California for $300,000. And so every time you see a Steve Garvey ad or an ad mentioning Steve Garvey, that is all the super PAC that's trying to basically end this election March 5th, have a race that's Adam Schiff versus Steve Garvey. A Republican will not win in California, and sort of end the race. And so part of where we are in this race is, I think, for a whole bunch of reasons, it's really good for both little d democracy and also big D Democrats to have 2 Democrats on the ballot all the way through November.
Yeah, I really want folks to understand this. So I'm just going to draw an illustration for people, because when I got out of the race, what I explained is there are 2 flywheels: direct donations, which help you with marketing for name ID and activation. That you have to run the business of the campaign. So you have to have a website and staff to run your social media. You might get partnership through organizations, community organizations that support you, caucuses that support you. And then you have to pay just an enormous amount in advertising. And those of us on the call from Google, some of us helped build that business. But only if you have name ID do you really get press. And only if you have press do I feel like you get real funders. So what Katie is talking about is this indirect money that comes in the last 6 weeks of the campaign. Now, keep in mind, the winner up until recently in polling was undecided. So people are going to the polls and they're undecided. And so if 40% of Californians are undecided, they choose candidates like they choose a movie for Friday night. Who have I heard of? And so if somebody wants to take Katie out of the race, Katie and Adam should be the front runners. But if somebody wants to take Katie out of the race, they support not just Adam, but this guy, Steve Garvey, who I swear is a bot. Like, I don't think he's a human. He's like an AI bot. He was on the Dodgers in like the 80s, and he makes literally no sense. He's the only I haven't endorsed anyone, but I have actively dissuading people from getting this guy, Steve Garvey, in, but it's really nefarious. So Katie, so just to say, and the same people who could be supporting Schiff, I don't know this to be true, but conceivably could also be supporting Steve Garvey just because people know his name because they love sports. And Katie had a great quote when debating this guy. I would find it very hard to debate him because I would just be like, is your brain the size of a pea? But you said once a Dodger, always a Dodger, which was really funny. Anyway, Katie, we digress. Would you support campaign finance reform, specifically this? All private money out, have this be publicly financed by the government with a little bit of a minimum, to your point of people have to be able to speak on stumps to real people to get money, but are you supportive of that?
There's no doubt that a public finance system would be transformative in who gets elected to Congress. One of the first things you do when you become a candidate traditionally is they ask you to Rolodex. And this should give you a sense of how old these people are, right? Because most people, I have to explain what a Rolodex even is. And so the idea is you go through everyone you know and you put a dollar amount next to their name. It's one of the most disgusting kind of dehumanizing things I've ever done in my life. I also, by the way, was really bad at it because some people gave me $3,000 that I put down like $30, and some gave me $30 and I had put down 3,000. I wasn't very good at it because I was a first-time candidate. And so I think that public financing would allow us to elect younger people. It would allow us to elect people from more moderate income, middle working class professions, be that nurses or teachers or other things. And I think it would allow people to move more easily in and out of politics. Part of the reason people stay so long is the effort to get in is unbelievable. It's just grueling and so hard. And then they think to themselves, I gotta stay. Right. And so it really would be transformative. One of the problems we face is we have so much, and I think this goes to your newsletter a little bit, Lexi, this week, which is we have so much government mismanagement of money and concern about the debt spending, and that there's no political will, particularly bipartisan political will, for public financing of campaigns.
Yeah, so I think that I'm just conscious of time. Katie, you have to go at 6:15 on the dot.
About 6:20. Oh, let me tell my son, hang on, I forgot to tell my son to pick up my daughter. Let me tell him to pick up his sister, and then I should be okay to stay a little longer. Can you pick up? I dropped her off at water polo, and I forgot to tell her how to get home. Sorry about that.
This continues.
Thank you. I'm really glad you said that because otherwise she would be standing there. Okay, we'll see what he says. He's 18, so it's like, rolling the dice.
Sajal, will you take yourself off? Will you put yourself on video? Sajal, my daughter, is here, and we had several instances, including when I was trying to get support from a Democratic committee where Sajal was trying to reach me. So I totally appreciate that you're balancing two things. Seiji, will you put your video on? We'll see. She might be sort of not there. I think I know your answer. So there are about 6 questions I want to get to. So let's we'll keep it going, but they're all pretty juicy. I think you already answered Russ's question. Is it ethical to spend money on a message you don't believe in to boost one of your opponents? Seems like gaming democracy. That's a little bit what we were just talking about with Garvey. Do you have anything else on that?
No, I guess I would say the other thing about the ad that's, I think, troubling is Garvey's got many concerning features. I think it's it's hard to even really describe him if you haven't seen him. His closing pitch to California voters at the last debate was, "I'm here entering your minds and bodies." And I thought, oh my God, stay away from my body. Like, so weird. But I think that the one thing that is also troubling about the ad is it actually isn't correct. Say what you want about Steve Garvey. He has not taken some of the positions that the ad suggests he has, partly because he hasn't taken much of any position, but he's been asked about abortion. He has said that he would not vote for a nationwide abortion ban. He's been asked about gun violence prevention, and he said he would protect California's current gun violence laws. So he's also said he's not sure if he's going to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And so the ad kind of portrays him as this extremist, which maybe he would become, but it's inconsistent with what he's actually said. And so I think that that's another sort of challenge with the ad, is it's not actually accurate.
Yeah, well, so we'll move on to, I'm going to combine a couple people's questions. Megan just asked about the biggest obstacle to public financing. Maybe I'll do a super question, but trust in Congress is 13%. Congress runs a budget. There's a huge deficit this year, and that adds to $34 trillion in debt. Congress just has a big bad rap. And it feels like, even though y'all, and I say the House and the Senate, are responsible for big things, our budget, staffing, the Supreme Court, the ability to impeach the president, go to war, it just doesn't feel like this is a group that operates in any way like a team. It operates like individual contributors. My diagnosis is, until and unless the Senate in particular operates as a team with defined mission and priorities, we are not going to pass anything of import. Like you said, everything is getting done by executive order because the Senate is not able to get anything done. So things like public financing, gun control, climate action, all of these require 2/3 majority in the Senate. And I guess, what's your theory of the case of how that happens, given where we are today?
Yeah, so under the current Senate rules, things require 60%, so 60 senators, and that's what's needed to overcome a filibuster. So the system's actually a little worse than Lexi described. Say that a group of senators have come together as a team and want to vote on a bill. Any one senator can block that. That's nuts. That's really nuts. And then to overcome that block takes 60 votes to overcome the filibuster. And by the way, the filibuster is not something that you're going to find in those little pocket constitutions that those dudes with the red tie sometimes carry around. It's not in the Constitution. It's a rule of procedure, and not a very good one. Because what it does is, if there's a tough vote that would require someone to really take a stand and make a hard decision, maybe make some of their donors upset, for example, they put a hold on it. It gets filibustered, and they don't have to, they can continue to say that they're in favor, for example, of comprehensive immigration reform, but never have to define what that actually means to them. I think you're right about the team. I think one of the differences between the House and the Senate that is really important is, by design, the House is a team sport. There are 435 people. The fact that someone who's only been there 5 years like me has managed to break through, this doesn't happen a lot because it's just so big. The Senate is, by design, designed to be a little bit more individualistic, but I think you raise a fundamentally important point that I want to repeat, basically what you said, Lexi, which is, all of the discussion in Washington is about teams, them and us, Republicans and Democrats. It's constantly talking about teams, but there's very little to no work on building strength, cohesion, and sort of a strategy among our team to think about, among other things, how we're going to bring Republicans into it. And so this is a huge problem. So I think that it's too much thinking about partisanship as the only teams that matter, and do we have enough votes and this many people and that many people, and not enough thinking about how do you build a functional team that can create the kind of dynamic where you can win people over. I will say, on an individual person to person level, I have amazing relationships with Republican colleagues. Amazing. And I'll give you an example. House Oversight, which is the committee that's been spending all of its time on Hunter Biden and the border, very controversial topics. I just got my bill passed out of there. It's an election bill. So you can imagine this inflames partisan tension. I just got it's vote by mail, and I just got it passed out of the House Oversight Committee 44-0. And I think this may be near the only unanimous vote we've taken this year. So there is a role for those individual relationships, but I think your point about the team structure is an important thing. Congress should think about it.
I'm just putting some folks on mute. So again, the filibuster can block one bad apple can spoil the bunch. You can overcome the bad apple if you get 66 senators to agree with you.
60.
Okay, I thought it was 66. 60.
2/3 is for used to be the standard for judicial confirmations. So you're not making that up. That's out there in the ether too, as another confusing rule about government.
Do you see 10 colleagues in the Senate that are not? I mean, I actually think you need 12, right? Because there's 2 Democrats senators that are arguably not Democratic. I mean, I think the 2-party system is sort of losing I've lost the thread on who's who and what's what, and it just feels like nobody's really fighting for everyday American families. Do you feel like you have 12 partners that would band together, that you feel like you could bring together to pass gun reform and electoral reform, including public financing of elections? Do you see a path to that?
In today's Senate, no, I do not. And I'm going to tell you that because I'm a straight shooter. The right answer is, oh yes, we can make this happen. Like, I'm going to tell you, I don't think we can make this happen, and I don't think it's likely to happen until the Republican Party moves away from kind of sort of the most extreme kind of whatever we need to do to not make Donald Trump angry kind of mindset, which is really where it is, right? And so the Republican Party, I have a lot of things to say about Democrats and why their problems in the 2-party system. But to be clear, I mean, one of the reasons Democrats have problems is that our main thesis seems to be we suck less than them, which I can't imagine like trying to market a product and saying, this one will give you here's my packaged food, my frozen food. Mine only gives you diarrhea. Theirs gives you salmonella. I mean, this is sort of what we're doing, right? And so the lack of an affirmative case for things. But until we have more Republicans who are willing and able to think for themselves and to be more responsive to their constituents, because the things you mentioned, like gun violence prevention, banning Congress members from trading stock, these are things that have like 80-90% public support, and yet don't even get a vote in the United States Senate today.
Yeah, so maybe I'll expand on that, and if anybody we're going to close out in 4 minutes here. I exited the election, I think, as a woman who has a fair amount of privilege and put a lot of money into my campaign. I could not even really make a dent, like not a dent. And here we say we want younger people and we want people with technology experience and people with business. I mean, the Democratic Party didn't even acknowledge that I existed. Which, again, it's not for me, but it just got me curious. Wow, if I can't even have an on-ramp, like who gets an on-ramp here if you really want to play at that table? And I'm not sure that that table should be exclusive to only people who have worked their way through government or what have you.
Mhm.
So I just as by way of interest, I've started something called the Courageous Leader PAC, which will fund which will fund candidates running for Congress and the Senate who, regardless of party, I think have a sensible plan for people, planet, and democracy. So Katie, we should talk more about that when we get a chance, because I think summarizing your answer to Megan's question, yeah, there isn't a path to 60 people doing common sense legislation. That is what everybody on this call can do. Support candidates with your money, or by hosting an event, or using your social platform to increase the name brand awareness among your social circle for candidates that are sensible on the things that you care about. And I'm excited to hear you say that. Where do you stand on term limits? I say 12 years for Congress, both Senate and House, so 6 terms or 2 terms. Are you supporting?
I am the only candidate left in this race who even thinks we should have this conversation, which I think is nuts. So I don't know if those numbers are exactly right. I think there may be some differences between the House and the Senate that maybe wouldn't give me to the same number in both. But there's no doubt that we need to invigorate these institutions, and term limits can be part of how we do that. Now, we have term limits in our California legislature, and they're kind of a mixed bag. They have some pros and cons, which is why you want to think them through. But one of the things the Republicans have done really effectively is they have created some other structures that guide people along. So you're not able to kind of, if you get into power and you have a gavel and you're a committee chairperson, you're not able to just stay chair for the rest of your life, which is the Democratic system, right? So you could be chair for 6 years and then you've got to give up the gavel. You can go off to another committee and work your way back up. So I do absolutely think we should have a conversation about term limits. I don't know if those are the right numbers, Lexi, but I was shocked that my colleagues are so afraid of this idea that they just say no.
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say, want to support the conversation, support the spirit of it, which is people can't die in office and we can't have senators with dementia, like we just can't. And but the specifics, your plan may be different than my plan. Here's what I would say to everybody. If you like what you've heard, this is about an open interview for a position that you all are the hiring committee on. So you choose whether you hire Katie or Barbara or Christina, who you met last week. I'm not currently planning to host conversations with others, but I believe strongly that we need to worship democracy the way that too many people overly worship capital. If I said tonight, I'm interviewing Elon Musk, who I think has a lot of interesting things we could interview him on. If I said I was interviewing Elon Musk, I would have had 1,000 people here, standing room only. I have one of the most capable Congress people who is running for US Senate. There are only 100 senators. They can do things like declare war, and we're on the precipice of potentially 2. We don't have enough attention to this institution, which impacts all our lives. So the Let's Get Real series and these interviews in particular are about exposing people to candidates, their strategy, their structure, their plan, their values, and their motivation for the job. If you like what you heard for Katie tonight, please support her with money. She needs it. She needs it. And she also can use your social support. You can follow her and blast her stuff on your various social media platforms. Katie, you have You have one more question that I'd love for you to share, or I have for you, and then if you have any final words. A book, or what is one recommendation you have on either a book, a podcast, or a movie that you think everybody should watch, read, or listen to?
Yeah, so I'm going to say two books because I crave quiet because it's one of the things about the Congress you may not know is it's like the loudest place you've ever been, with 500 or 600 people screaming all at once on the House floor. So I'm going to say two books because I crave quiet. And they are Dark Money by Jane Mayer, Mayer. It's a book that really explains some of the fundraising pieces that we've been talking about, including why we don't actually know who's giving for super PACs, because the disclosure is after the election in many cases. So Dark Money by Jane Mayer. And then the second book is called Evicted. And it's by Matthew Desmond, and it really exposes the incredible human cost to unaffordable housing. And it's very, very readable. It's set in Milwaukee, but that scene plays out all over California all of the time.
Great, awesome. Katie, any final words for this crew?
Yeah, I'll just say this. This is a race about the future. That is what we're campaigning for. It's not a sticker for past achievement, although I'm very, very proud of what I have achieved in my life. But the questions we need to be asking are, what is your plan to change what we've been doing? If we do more of the same, we'll get what we've always got. Right? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Right? And so I think it is important here. And I think the major thing that makes me stand out, and it has been somewhat controversial with some of my own colleagues, is my willingness to kind of say, I want us to be better, not better than the other guy, just better in general, better at protecting our planet, better at creating confidence in government, better at solving very challenging problems like the cost of housing. And so I think, some people, they just want to say, like, I've been doing it, let me keep doing it. And, there's something to be said for having lots of experience. I've been through 2 impeachments, an insurrection, what else? Oh, a pandemic. I mean, I've got a lot of experience in my 5 years, let me tell you. And so I feel like the future orientation, what is the strategy to improve our democracy, to repair, not just to defend, but to repair and improve it, I think is what sets me apart. And I would love to earn your support in this race. It's a really close primary. There'll be another poll, I think, coming out tomorrow. And it's just neck and neck. And so I really could use your help, and I'm really grateful to Lexi for convening this and for running such a thoughtful campaign herself.
Well, Katie, it was hard running against you, but it's good to play sports against people that are better than you and make you stronger. And I really want to give you some praise for, I think it's easy for people to call and say, will you endorse me? And after you're no longer a candidate, which really is code for, like, can you give me your donors? I feel like a lot of time. But you did something that I think is really symbolic of your values, which is, you said, Lexi, of course I would love your endorsement, but there's no way you could give that to me because you don't know me well. Like, we have to get to know each other. And I said, I appreciated that. And you had really done your homework on where my strengths were and what I had to offer. And you were open and gave me the inspiration to do this series because I really think that this is about people being able to make their own choice, but with much better information than you usually get through hackneyed debates and paid for press. So thank you for being willing to do it. Enjoy the various pickup and dinner schedules that you have. Everybody, this week, my newsletter is out. It's on the business case of the US government, and it has a plan for how I would hope some candidates might approach the question of what feels to me like a very shaky enterprise from a budget standpoint. But it expands what I think are pretty empty terms, like the debt ceiling is bad or the debt is good or bad. We need more nuance and more understanding. So I hope you find that helpful. Spread the word about these conversations. If you liked tonight, come back and I'll put the videos up. They'll be on my YouTube channel and on Instagram, and get the word out about Katie. Let's do this.
Thank you. And don't forget March 5th.
Oh,
Vote
and
on March
most
5th.
importantly, vote, but you also have your mail-in ballots already in California. Katie, is there anybody on the ballot, actually, I should have asked you this, that you would say definitely vote for other than yourself?
Well, this is the only statewide race, which is part of the reason it's so important that we have two good candidates go to November, because this is the engine for talking about issues all over the state that affect California. So our other officials, governor and attorney general and all those, none of those people are on the ballot. So my ballot, other than the Senate race and Proposition 1, which we didn't have a chance to talk about, are the only things that our ballots are going to have in common.
Yeah, okay. And do you want to tell someone in 30 seconds why people's names are for the caretaker role as well as the full-time role, even though
Yes,
there is someone in the caretaker position?
yes. So this is another example of need to maybe think and change things. But you're not going to believe me when I tell you this, but here it is. So the governor appointed a woman named LaFonza Butler, and she will serve until election day, in November. And then whoever wins this special election will serve from election day to swearing in day, 2 months. So think about the cost just to print that additional ballot, the confusion that it creates. People are like, I voted for US Senate. These are like extra pages. My ballot is messed up, right? And so then there is the normal 6-year term. So for that 2-month period, there are 7 candidates on the ballot. I am one of them. And then for that full 6-year term, there are like 29 people. And so it's really confusing, but I think this is a dumb system. If the governor, Senator Feinstein passed away, the governor made an appointment, we ought to let her go until we have our election results and the next person gets sworn in. I don't know that anyone is going to transform Congress in 7 weeks. They'll be lucky if they can find the bathroom in that time, to be perfectly honest. It's really a warren of tunnels there. And so that's why it's on there twice. What this did, though, and I'll just close with this, is and this is pretty insidious, really, it doubled the contribution limits in the race. Because the 2-month election and the 6-year term are each considered a separate election. So then you can give $3,300 for that 2-month term. Think about the cost per day, right, of donating to that, and $3,300 for the 6-year term. That undercut candidates like me who do a lot of their fundraising through grassroots contributions, because I do have people who give $50 a month or $100 a month, and they start, to get there. But 66 is really hard. So that, I think, was a major advantage for Adam Schiff, frankly, who has more of those $6,600 donors than I do.
Yeah.
And so that's probably not the greatest system for a whole bunch of reasons, including just the taxpayer dollar waste of it all, as well as the confusion factor.
Right. And but in theory, someone could win the caretaker role other than LaFonza Davis.
Oh, LaFonza Butler is not on the ballot for the caretaker. Yeah, LaFonza Butler is not on the ballot for the caretaker role.
Right.
So Gavin is only able to appoint her through election day. So the caretaker role comes to an end under state law.
Yeah.
And then we have this little election for a mini term, November 5th to January 1.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, wouldn't you like to be a senator for 7 weeks? I mean, and so that is, I think, something we should correct. And if we need to have an appointment, we ought to just let the person do the work until the next person is sworn in. It's really silly to have the second ballot for this. It's not like after we have the primary, we choose a new person to take care of it. That would make sense.
Yeah,
It's just that little 2-year step,
there's so many things like this. And
the
again,
2-month step.
now
Sorry.
I'm gonna wrap it up with a big finish. But I was shocked. I was actually supposed to be on the ballot. I had filed all the paperwork, was there. You pay by the word for your blurb in the ballot. So in addition to what Katie just said, you actually have to do the blurb for all of those, for the special election and the main election, and you pay by the word. It was so nuts to me. And it was also an episode out of Parks and Recreation, because there are so many crazy things about what you can and can't put on there. I was in there for 3 hours. I am best friends with the people in the San Mateo election board. People, I am sorry for taking up that little bit of time, especially if you're not in California, but the bottom line is, if you like what you heard tonight, just vote for Katie straight through. Pay attention to democracy, come to Lex Get Real, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Lexi has my contact information. I didn't manage to put it in the chat, but if anyone wants to get a hold of me, Lexi knows how. Thank you again, Lexi. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great job, Lex.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.